the news was vinyl records, this is from the BBC, vinyl records outsell CDs for the first time in decades. What is it that makes this happen? That digital downloads just keep going lower and lower, and yet physical purchases, especially vinyl, is going up. Now, I don't expect that's going to go on forever, but there is something to that we want to hold on to something, that we want to have a physical representation. It's a connection to that music that isn't just through your ears. It's a physical connection. It's a visual connection. There's more to it. And kids in today's world, this isn't just me being it is kind of me just being an old man, but kids get that. They want that extra connection. And so they go buy it and to have that, even how often do I listen to my records? I don't listen to them very often, but I have them. I hold on to them because they represent something. It's a connection to an artist. The music is sitting there on that record, ready to be released, but just having those things. And I sometimes will just go in there and stand by it and pull the records out and look at them. Just their existence, just their presence matters. And you don't have that when it's on your phone. And I think that that's one of the reasons that there is that resurgence, because we want to have that physical representation sitting there. There's something about that. This artist that I love, it isn't just these ones and zeros, this digital media on a phone. It's a physical manifestation of that person sitting right there on my shelf. And whether I listen to it or not is not the point. The point is that I have made a connection. I've put money into this thing. This matters to me. It is my music. And so I want to have a physical manifestation of that thing. And I'm willing to spend money on that physical manifestation of the music that I like. Anyway, that's such an important thing. And I think that's part of it. Why kids today want to have that connection again. That want to buy records, want to have those things. It's not just nostalgia. This was kind of a cool post too. I studied cover art. It's what started me on my artistic path. So I don't know anything about this person, but this person got more and more involved in art, and I understand that. That whole experience. Like I said, when I was a kid in art class in school, I would frequently, more than once, I painted album covers. I remember so often doing something. I made a T-shirt once where I recreated an album, Billy Squier's Emotions in Motion album cover. I literally painted it onto a T-shirt. So there really is something to that appreciating the album art. You weren't bombarded with it. There was the one piece of art that came on the record, and that was what the artist decided was going to be the physical manifestation of what the music was. And we gained appreciation for art in that way as individuals. And here's a person that actually became an artist as a result of looking at album covers. And there's so many. There's so many great album covers that were just so... Sometimes album covers, I buy records just because of the album cover, because it spoke to me for some reason, but I didn't end up loving the album, but I still loved the cover. And in some ways I liked having it. There's a Santana album, I can't remember which one it was, but I don't particularly love the album. But the art, I sometimes pull it out just to look at it. 2 days ago, I did it. I remember I was just going through my albums and I was like, I love that cover. I'll do a video of it one of these days just to show it. It's a pencil drawing and it's drawn in such a way that it's a whole bunch of different things in the same picture. And I just always liked it. And it kind of spoke to me. So there was this thing that there really was this art appreciation that came with it. Don't forget, when you got the album, you took extra care to only touch the outside, never ever the grooves for fear of scratching it forever. That's, like I said a minute ago, you learned to appreciate ownership because you'd buy these things and you knew that it didn't take much to ruin that. And so you were very, very ginger with that. with that record, and he did learn to appreciate ownership and taking care of things. That's such a great point. Here's another one. I loved this one. I raked leaves as a kid so I could go buy 45s. Yes, this was part of you investing in something you loved, and you had to work for it, and you made that connection. I mean, here's somebody raking leaves. I'm going to go do this so I can make some money to go buy that piece of music. And that made music mean more to you because you had to work for it. Yes, you can listen to the radio, but radio, first of all, didn't sound as good because of the way they'd compress it. And second of all, you don't know what was going to come on and when it was going to come on. I want this song and I want to have it so I can listen to it whenever I want to. And so you'd go do work and you'd earn money so you could go buy records. And here's an example of that. And 45s, they were only a couple of bucks, but you would only make a couple of bucks raking leaves. I remember when I got the Number of the Beast. This was such a funny story how this happened. My mom asked me to mow the grass, which I just did anyway because I was a teenager and I was just in charge of mowing the grass. But there's one particular time that I said, if I mow the grass, will you buy me a record? And she goes, yeah. I said, okay, I'm going to go mow the grass and then we're going to go to Sound Warehouse and you're going to buy me a record. And I said, and any record, right? It doesn't matter. You'll just buy whichever one I say, right? Because I knew what I wanted. And she says, okay, sure. So I went out and mowed the grass. Beautiful job. Got the grass done. And I came in and I said, all right, let's go to Sound Warehouse. So we drove to Sound Warehouse and we hightailed it right over to the Iron Maiden bin and I pulled it out and it was Number of the Beast. And I remember my mom going, you want that record? And I said, yeah. And you said you'd buy any record. It didn't matter. And she goes, okay. So I bought Number of the Beast. And I took that thing home and I remember putting that needle on and woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil. I mean, it was so... I remember listening to that and just being so creeped out, but it was so cool. But yes, that record, that one still sits in my record collection, and that record is directly connected to a mowed lawn. I would rake leaves as a kid so I could go buy 45s. What a great post. I love that. Okay, I love this post too. Many of my favorite songs are deep, deep cuts that you would only know about if you listened to the album from start to finish. I cannot tell you how many times this happened with me. Deep, deep cuts. The deep, deep cuts. The songs that no one else liked. Not just a really cool song on the album that a lot of other people heard and liked, but sometimes the song that nobody else liked. I remember one in particular. I bought a Queensryche album, and there was this song on it that it turns out later was actually a cover song, but it's this song, it's the album, by the way, Rage for Order, and it's the song Gonna Get Close to You. And it didn't really sound like anything else that Queensryche had done. And I remember talking to other people about it, and I didn't meet it. I had a lot of friends that liked Queensryche, and none of them even really knew or remembered the song at the time, or it really wasn't one that stood out for them. But man, for me, that was the song. I mean, to this day, that's one of my favorite things Queensryche ever did, was this cover song of Gonna Get Close to You. It was so creepy, and the production was so cool. The way Jeff Tate sang it, the instrumentation, it was just amazing. And it was that cut that just was the oddball thing on the album. It was so great. And I have so many songs like that. I mean, I really could go on forever. You start going back and I could pull out so many albums out of that connection and go, yeah, this song right here was the one that really stood out to me. I mean, anyway, I get that. My favorite songs are deep, deep cuts you'd only know about if you listen to the album from start to finish. And that's what you would do. And part of the reason, see, that's the other thing here. You'd buy a record, and because you put money into it, because you paid for it, you wanted it to be good. You didn't want it to stink. You wanted that album to be excellent because you paid for it. And so it would force you to listen to music that you wouldn't normally listen to. You wanted this record to be excellent. You wanted to like the songs on it. And so you would give it a listen, and you wouldn't necessarily like it. And you'd do maybe a week or two later, you'd give it another listen because I really want this album to be good because I love the cover. I love the idea of this album. So I'm going to listen to that again. I'm going to give it another try. And you'd do that. I still do that sometimes. I'll break out an album and go, why didn't I like this? And I'll break it out and I'd listen to it again and try to figure it out. And sometimes, anyway, it was such an important thing to force yourself. It's kind of like, it's a little bit like when your parents wanted you to try food and you didn't want to try it. And then later you'd figure out that it was really good. It was a similar idea here, where you forced yourself to try something that you didn't like, or that you didn't think you'd like. You'd force yourself. And it's part of art appreciation, because you really would get to the point that you'd go, I hate this. I hate this song. And you'd actually start to recognize things, why I hated it. I hate that guitar tone. I think it sounds muddy. I don't like the way he sang that. I mean, you actually would develop an appreciation for art in ways that you couldn't do otherwise. And same thing, not just with the songs, but even the covers. I mean, there were album covers. I did a video. I'm not sure if it's live by the time when this is being released or when this video comes out. But I did a little review on the album cover for Journey Frontiers, which I think was terrible. But the cover, not the album, although the album, is debatable on if it was great or not. But I remember going and seeing that album, Frontiers, for the first time and having a reaction to looking to it, and not a positive one, having a negative reaction. And it was funny because I really had to think through, why didn't I like this? And then I'd see other things that were similar and that I'd think, well, I kind of like that, but I don't like this. What is it about that? And even if I wasn't really thinking it through and even jotting it down, those things leave an impact on you. And as a kid, when you're developing and you're learning art and you're learning to appreciate this stuff, and it all mattered, and it all made a difference to you. And so you were learning things when you would be forced to interact with art. This one really hit me. I thought this was interesting how they phrased this. Each song was like a new friend. The one I met earlier, the one that doesn't get me, and that one you've waited your entire life for. That was so beautifully put. Because there really were these songs that for some reason, there's a song that kind of brings you back to a time in your life. A song that for some reason speaks to you differently, doesn't understand you. I mean, think of it that way. It's an interesting way to look at it. A song, the one that doesn't get me. A song that doesn't really understand me. And then the one that you've waited for your entire life. It's so interesting how these musicians would craft music that represents you. Next one, Playing with the Wheel on Zepp 3. Oh my gosh. This is so true. Led Zeppelin 3 was such a great example of artists being creative with the packaging. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but Led Zeppelin 3 opens up. It's a complete fold out. But the cover, the front cover, has a bunch of holes in it. And it's just random pictures, but then the holes, there's a spinny wheel on the side, kind of like a child's book, and as you turn it, the pictures in all these different holes change. And it was such a cool thing because the album cover was never the same. Every time you'd spin it, it would just look a little bit different. So it was kind of an awesome thing that Led Zeppelin did. And Led Zeppelin they did a lot of interesting stuff with their packaging, but that was such a great example of of something awesome in the packaging where the artists had to get creative. And they probably sold albums because of that. And another example, Grand Funk. Grand Funk has an album that had 3D glasses that you would pop out of the front of the record and then put them on, and the whole album then, all the artwork was in 3D. And they probably sold albums from that, from having 3D glasses. And it was and the album wasn't great, but I like having it because of that. So there were so many different things like this where the artists would create these cool, immersive, interactive experiences that went beyond just looking at it. I said this before in that video I talked about earlier that I did on Fleetwood Mac. I mentioned this, that part of listening to music with records, it's not just hearing it, it's not just seeing it, it's tactile. You're touching it. You're physically interacting with your music. And it enhanced it so much more. Like this example right here, Led Zeppelin 3, you're literally touching it. You're having to interact with it in a physical way. Feeling it. I mean, look at all the senses that were involved with listening to music. You had your sight, your sound, your touch, and even your smell were all involved with this. So anyway, that was something so special. I love that this person brought this up, playing with the wheel on Zep 3. Okay, I really, really loved this next comment. The delicious moment when the needle falls into the groove. Delicious. I love that comment. And it's so true. Because when you would put an album on, and you'd either set the needle down by hand, or you'd move it over the arm and then you drop it down with that little lever. Either way you did it, on the outer edge of the album, there was the grooves were not right next to each other. There was a lot more just kind of vinyl in between the grooves. So when you would drop the needle, it would almost always land on that space where there wasn't a groove, and then of course it would fall into the groove, and there was a sound that came with it. And it wasn't just a click or a pop, it was a little bit of a thud. Because there was bass sound that came out of that. So it would thud. And you would recognize, if you listen to records, you would recognize that sound. That sound meant something. It was all part of the experience. And all of us, no matter what record you bought, didn't matter what kind of music you listened to, none of that mattered. All of us knew that sound. All of us did. If you owned a record player, which pretty much everybody did, you knew that sound. And here I am right now. I'm a guy that listens to all different kinds of music. But if I didn't, if I were coming to this discussion here, and I was somebody that was really into heavy metal, but then you had this other person who was into pop music, and you had this other person who was into classical music, all of us knew that experience. It's so cool. Anyway, I love that comment, this delicious moment when the needle falls into the groove. It's just awesome. Okay, this next comment, I thought this is really important, and I appreciate the fact that this person brought this up. Modern music is recorded digital and mastered digital. Pressing digital audio to vinyl doesn't magically transform it to analog. And without going into all the technical stuff here, that's correct. It doesn't magically turn it into analog. Most of the music that we would have listened to that was on records way back when, most of it was recorded on 2-inch tape. And if you're curious what that is, I actually have another video I put out like 5-6 years ago where I explain 2-inch tape. And it was the industry standard for professional recording for a couple of decades. And it was all the great stuff that you listen to, almost all of it, at least from records, was originally recorded on 2-inch tape. And so anyway, this is a very important thing, that way back then, all this stuff was kind of always stayed in the analog realm. And so that's what this person is driving at. So anyway, very, very important point, and I appreciate this person brought that up. Also, I love this comment too. I love all these comments. There were so many comments. I'm only reading a handful of them, honestly. There were so many great things, but this is another one I really liked. Also, you went to record stores with a friend. It was a nice social experience. And that is so important to understand. I mean, whenever I'd go to a record store, I mean, it was an activity for some people to go do. You know, I get a call from my friend. Probably the person I went to the record stores most when I was a kid was a guy named CJ. We were just buddies. We spent a lot of time together. We really, really liked the same kind of music. We both had big record collections, and we would just talk about music and listen to music all the time. But we would go to record stores together, and you'd give your friend a call. Hey, I'm heading over to the record store. You want to go? And then you'd head over and you'd make an afternoon out of it. You'd spend an hour or two or more looking through records, and you'd go through them and you'd look at what's the new stuff that's here today. And you'd pick up records. Have you ever heard of this before? And you'd talk about it, and you'd maybe get to know the person that worked there. And they'd kind of understand the kind of music that you'd like. And as you'd bring a record up, they'd sometimes ask you, what's that music like? Or what are you listening to there? Or oh, have you heard of this other one? That sounds kind of like them. And you'd get to know these people. Or sometimes you'd even go into a record store by yourself, and somebody would be looking at another album that you can tell they're into the same kind of music you're into, and you start asking each other stuff. Hey, have you ever heard of this album before? Is this any good? And then you'd build a friendship or a relationship talking about music. So there was this whole social element, a huge social component to listening to music. I talked about that earlier. We'd go to other people's houses and listen to music, but this is beyond that. This is where you're meeting people that you don't even know in many cases because you go to a record store. And so that was a big part of listening to music, was this whole social interaction with other people and meeting other people that were interested in similar things you were into, or even being introduced to things that you didn't like or didn't think you'd like, or maybe had decided that you wouldn't like, and then somebody that you meet is into this. And I mean, how often, that would happen with you were interested in a girl, and you would go buy albums that you normally wouldn't buy because you wanted to own them so that she could see that you like some of this stuff. It was more than just pull it up on your phone and, hey, listening to a song. I mean, that would say something if you owned it. It mattered. Anyway, so this is such a great thing. A nice social experience. That's exactly right. Going to a record store was a nice social experience. And then this is the last comment, at least the last one I pulled up. There were so many comments. These were in no order, but this was a really, really awesome one. And it had our undivided attention while we were listening and perusing the album cover. No text chiming in, no emails, just the album. And sometimes you'd listen to music while you were doing chores or working on homework or something like that, but there was a lot of time where it was just you and that album. You and that album cover. No beeps, no chimes, no buzzes, no rings. Just you listening to that song, listening to that music, and then studying and just taking the time to interact with that record, that cover. And like somebody said earlier, it wasn't moving. It was just this oftentimes is a photograph, a painting, a drawing, whatever was on there. And then there was just time. There was time looking at those. And it wasn't always even just the albums that you owned. This goes along with the store comment that we talked about a minute ago. You spend an enormous amount of time going to record stores just to look at the records. And there were times when I'd see the same record over and over and over again and eventually just decided to buy it. Because you spent a lot of time interacting with this stuff. It was a big, big deal. But that undivided attention thing, there wasn't all this other stuff happening all the time like we have today. You really did there really was carved out time where it was just you and that album cover and the music, and you were forced to interact with it. And it was interesting how often then, as part of that undivided attention, you'd start to recognize things. For example, does this music and this album cover, do they go together? What's happening here? And there's a lot of albums that don't, and there's a lot of albums that do. And that's one of the, you think about these artists that recorded this music, and they're really having to think about that. What is the visual representation we want to have for this music? Because we got one shot and it's going to be one picture. Not like what's going on today, where it could be thousands of different things and videos, and and one song can have a whole bunch of different videos, and the 20 different live performances you see of the thing online, and on and on and on. This is one picture that has to represent this entire 10 songs. What picture can we pick that is going to represent 10 songs? That's pretty cool. And then we, on the other end, gave that our undivided attention. We'd listen to they'd put that record on, and we'd interact with it at that point. And that was really, really something. That's really something to have that kind of an experience. I'd love to hear, if you're still watching the video, I'd love to hear what album covers really struck you. And when you go back and think about album covers that spoke to you, what were they? What were those album covers that spoke to you in some way? And why? What was it that did it to you? I'd love to hear your input or your thoughts on that. And if you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, of course, and please comment. I'm sure after listening to this, if you actually sat through that whole thing, you've got to have some comments or thoughts about this, and I'd love to hear them. What is it about these numbers? Getting back to the beginning of this video, what is it that made this happen? We're watching digital downloads decreasing dramatically. And we're watching physical purchases going up. I may have mentioned this earlier, but I thought that it was a fad and it would be over by now, and records, used records would be cheap again and whatever, but it's not like that. I mean, record prices keep going up. People keep, the sales keep going up. And so and it's not just old people. There's a lot of young people that are doing this. And what is it? What is it that's causing it? And I think a lot of these comments explain that. And I thought this was so many of these things were such a big, really, really said it. And because we long for something. We long to have that physical manifestation, that physical representation of something that matters to us. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons that we buy books, the physical copies of books still. I have books that I've literally listened to on Audible. I've got the audiobook, but I still buy the physical copy because I want it for a lot of different reasons. I want it because I want to mark it up. I want to put bookmarks in it. I want to have this physical. I want people to walk into the studio and see that book, know that I read that. And it was a similar thing with records, because you could walk into somebody's house and start flipping through that record collection and know all kinds of things about that person. It was such an amazing thing. It was like a vision. It was a view into somebody's soul. Isn't that interesting? But it really was. You'd start flipping through somebody's records and it would just tell you about that person. Because it's similar. If you walk into somebody's house and they have books on the shelf, don't you go look at the books? And don't those books tell you? Don't they tell you about this person? They have a bunch of romance novels. They have a bunch of self-help books. They have a bunch of old westerns, whatever it happens to be. You learn about that person by what's on that shelf. And it was the same thing with records. And it's probably one of the reasons that sales are what they are today even. Because these things, even if people aren't looking at them all the time, we are. You know that you own it, and you know that it's sitting right there. And that record represents something. That record represents a piece of you. That record represents the way you think or the way you feel. It's a manifestation. It's a physical manifestation of something that's inside that you can't really describe. But you have that thing. And maybe there's a longing for that in our lives. To have that physical manifestation of things that we love. Things that speak to us. Things that touch us in some way. And perhaps that's why this is what's happening. These numbers are going up because you have these young people that yearn for that. Anyway, like I said, if you like these videos, please like, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support what we do here, go to AudioMover, audiomover.com. AudioMover.com. AudioMover is the company that takes your old audio and videotapes, converts them to digital. And if you have old audio and videotapes, you need to convert them to digital. Go to audiomover.com. Or even if you don't, you just know somebody that does, please let them know about us. And let them know about AudioMover because you don't want to lose that stuff. And of course, it all deteriorates. And so you want to get your old media digitized. So anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.